Catholicism and Italy have been tied at the hip since the beginning of Italian film. Symbolism and imagery relating to biblical figures is found in almost every film that has come out of Italy. It's a mainstay of directors sharing their personal experiences with understanding their faith or criticisms of the religion itself. While much of Italy's cinema is inspired by the Catholic faith, not as many films attack biblical stories head-on with their own reinterpretations. Early in the history of Italian cinema, many silent films were adapted from classics of the nation's literature, including what was one of the first Italian films made, Inferno, based on Dante's Inferno. The push and pull between cinema and the church has also existed since the inception of moving pictures, some members of the church originally thinking that cinema would outdo them in influence. By the 1940s, discussions of the differences between cinematic art and morality began to surface. This argument is that in cinema, beauty and aesthetics come before morality, which is cause for concern for the church. But is this truly the case, or was the church just afraid of what artists would say, and if people would latch on to these differing perspectives? All of these films that dissect and reinterpret the Bible and the Catholic tales that came after it do prioritize morals over aesthetics in many ways. Is it instead that the value systems and discussions of morality are those that criticize the church? Italian filmmakers Roberto Rossellini and Pasolini directed multiple films that took from Catholic stories, both of them making films on both Jesus's and St. Francis's lives. Although they share identical subject matter, their interpretations and beliefs differ drastically, as well as their use of Catholicism as a mechanism of further discussion on politics, intellectualism, and the universality of peace and love. The first film of these four was Rossellini's The Flowers of St. Francis, in which Rossellini examines the life and teaching of St. Francis and his monks through a series of loosely connected vignettes. 14 years later, Pasolini directed The Gospel According to St. Matthew, a dark and brooding Marxist look at the life and death of Jesus Christ. 2 years later, he would parody the works of Rossellini in his film Hawks and Sparrows, a surreal comedy analyzing the class differences through the stories a raven tells to a working-class father and son. The last of these four films was Il Messia, Rossellini's last film after a series of educational historical pictures. This was his interpretation of Christ's life. Pasolini's view of the world is fatalistic and dramatic. He sees the histrionic tragedy and suffering of Catholic figures as the most important, regularly juxtaposing the shadows of Catholicism with the underbelly of modern capitalist Italy. His films reminisce positively on the anarchy of the Holy Land. Capitalism is the great modern evil in Pasolini's eyes. Pasolini also holds great importance to the idea of the Almighty, the sacred, and his filmography consistently shows his struggle to obtain the answers to his questions regarding sacredness and redemption. While being a devout Catholic and a crazy son of a bitch, he employs an air of uncertainty in his films regarding God. He is searching to find something that will make his beliefs worth it, that there are things on this earth more holy than money. His work is less critical of the church, using it as a vehicle to explain the problems of modern society. His idea of Catholicism is also more ruthless, more violent than that of Rossellini's. Rossellini, on the other hand, preaches humbling and humiliation, as well as peace and love. He highlights the true human good of the mythic figures he reenacts on screen, using figures like St. Francis to remind the audience of their purest innocence and childlike wonder. He's also much more overtly political. The good that they do is in direct opposition to those that use the name of God to persecute others. Rossellini is searching for a way to bring a loving unity back into the conversation. Rossellini's portrayal of both St. Francis and Jesus strips them of their previously elusive and iconic status and shows them as relatable human figures who are vulnerable and learn lessons to become stronger along the way. He questions the romanticization of Christ and uses naturalism to allow the audience to watch these larger-than-life characters act as any other person would. Early in Il Messia, Rossellini centers on a day with an 8-or-so-year-old Jesus, where he and his parents go to market and prepare for a sacrifice of a lamb. Before they leave, Mary gets him dressed and tells Jesus the story of their people in Egypt. She says, "You belong to the law, and the law belongs to you." At the market, Joseph walks in with his arm around little Jesus' shoulder. Other fathers and sons walk in together, the children asking questions, innocents, ignorant, and open-minded. Jesus is then confronted with the horror of the sacrifice of the lamb, the brutality and death of innocence, as well as the disgusting reality of the innards plopping out of the dead animal. After this, Jesus is separated from his parents, and Mary absent-mindedly looks through the crowd. She and Joseph ask all these people where their son might be. After they frantically run through the entire market, they find young Jesus in the temple talking with a priest. Seeing Jesus, Mary, and Joseph act as a family unit is startling in a good way. Many other depictions of Jesus skip over the formative years of his life. He's born, he's an adult, he's on the cross. We forget he had to grow and be raised. Especially after the murder of an innocent young boy at the beginning of the film, we're forced to see Jesus as incredibly vulnerable in a way so different to that of his crucifixion and adult humility. His self-inflicted vulnerability is by his consent, and it's also romanticized for its overarching good. But the vulnerability of a child is the opposite. Children are vulnerable without their consent. They're vulnerable because of their absence of autonomy and their accompanying naivete of control. Rossellini's choice in showing Jesus not only as a child, but as one who gets lost with a scared mom and dad, reminds the audience of Jesus' humanity as well as his vulnerability. By using relatable circumstances, the audience can empathize with Jesus, Mary, and Joseph as equals, rather than the figures too sacred to compare themselves to. Rossellini's depiction of Mary is also exceptionally humanizing. The figure of Mary is one that's normally given more credence when depicted on her own. Most filmmakers step back in her characterization when portraying the story of Christ, and she's merely seen as a young, sullen figure without much importance. In Il Messia, Mary plays a very important role in Jesus' life, and she's seen to be a loving, guiding presence for him. One of the most interesting aspects of Rossellini's characterization is how much of Mary we can see in Jesus. Many of his values, his storytelling, his kindness and calm, warm demeanor reflect that of his mother and the things she had said and taught to Jesus previously on screen. Mary tells the story of the kingdom of heaven to a little boy, where she says that in order for heaven to be on earth, to remember that it is enough that all really love one another, that there be no enemies, and then the most sweet rivers of milk and honey will flow. Mary's interactions with other children remind the audience again of innocence, continuing to show Mary's maternal energy not only to her son, but literally to the whole world. Mary and Jesus are also constantly seen working and doing the same labor as common folk, emphasizing the importance of incorporating one's teachings and beliefs into their daily actions. The Jesus of Il Messia is incredibly kind and warm. He's also very physical and touches and caresses the people around him, no matter who they are. And above all, he's a storyteller, using fable and parable to explain morals in accessible, universal terms for the people around him. There's not a single argument of his oppressors he cannot explain away with a proverb. Once the people listening catch on, they either accept and believe or riot against him. Jesus accepts the response, no matter what the circumstances are, with tranquility and kindness. The first time Jesus slightly raises his voice is over an hour into the film, and it's only to remind his followers that John the Baptist is a human being, whereas Jesus himself is more of a mix, and that power on earth and in heaven are two different things. In this scene, he likens the men of his time to children playing in the marketplace. This is one of the few moments in Il Messia where Rossellini gives in and points out the inevitable elevation of Christ. He must remind us that no matter how human Jesus is, he's evolved past the children in the marketplace. In Flowers of St. Francis, Rossellini reminds the audience that perfect happiness is not attainable through external circumstances. Even when the monks love each other and work symbiotically, there are still rainstorms and people that take over their hut. However, happiness comes from doing good and finding the best in all situations. When the monks need to find something to offer to Sister Claire, they decide to pick flowers from the trees around their huts and make a carpet of flowers for her. One monk remarks, "How great is the Lord?" and they talk about the wonderful smell. When the monks ask for alms at a man's house, he beats them and throws them into the mud. Then Francis says, "Now that we've borne all of this love for our blessed Christ, know that in this resides perfect happiness. Because above all the gifts that Christ bestows on his servants is that of triumphing over ourselves and bearing every evil deed and tribulation out of love for him. So perfect happiness is withstanding and doing good and spreading love. Just that. Not the world around you, but just you and God." When Ginepro goes to the colony under Nicolaio's rule, there is a major juxtaposition between the brotherly dynamics of these two groups. The soldiers also act as brothers like the monks do, but they're brothers because they're violent together, fight each other, and are brutal. They cheer at this superficial brutality as they throw Ginepro around like a ball and use him to skip rope. This is also an allegory for the way that kind and peaceful people are taken advantage by louder, brutal people, and how they are often misunderstood by them because their value systems in daily life are so different. That shows Ginepro that words don't work as well as actions, because they might not understand the meaning and the context you wish them to. But actions, especially when geared towards a specific audience, will help people understand despite any social or cultural barriers. Ginepro is successful in overcoming this aggression with humility and with love. In the tyrant's camp, Brother Ginepro demonstrates, by converting the barbarians, the miraculous effect of love and humility on ordinary men. This film is intended not only to portray the saint, but to revitalize his teachings. By using his beliefs in context, he's able to save the day and rid the area of these oppressive forces, as well as broaden their understanding. Pasolini, on the other hand, takes a First Testament perspective. This harder, more aggressive approach does honestly feel more accurate to the time, especially in the sense that the people had only heard God in that context thus far, and Jesus is changing that in the present moment. This portrayal of Jesus is aggressive and brooding. He sees evil as a necessary force in the world, which is part of Pasolini's grimy, fatalistic view of life that brings about the carnal unease of a truly eye-for-an-eye Holy Land. He also speaks a lot about evil people, heathens, and what not to do or be, rather than what to do or to be. This is the school of Catholic thinking that's reminiscent of Scared Straight more than anything, using fear to instill God's wrath in his subjects. Pasolini never seems to give an answer as to his feeling of understanding God in this way. Is he critiquing this mentality? Or does he feel that this is the way to understand God? Already there's a real difference of tone between Pasolini and Rossellini. Pasolini is more dramatic, literally darker and dirtier, grimier visually. There's more of a presence of the divine or sacred in the Gospel according to St. Matthew than in anything by Rossellini. Pasolini has elevated Christ, Mary, Abraham, and Joseph from the second they appear on screen, and the classical music enhances the importance of every action taken by them. And in this scene when Jesus walks on water, the silence creates an electrifying intensity, as well as Pasolini's zooms and reaction shots back and forth. For while Pasolini admitted that he had been influenced by realism, he also spoke of his horror of naturalism, and was quick to point out the important ways in which his style differed from that, say, of a Rossellini. And while he often declared his love for reality, or defined cinema as the language of reality, he seemed to envision reality not in stylistic, but in phenomenological, social, and sometimes mystical terms. In Flowers of St. Francis, the atmosphere is very natural. The film looks closely at grounding earthly elements and being connected to each other and oneself through the natural world. There's a parallel between Rossellini's look at more medieval times and Pasolini's look at the Holy Land. Both directors show envy for the life those people lived in both of them. Inside and outside are shot and lit so drastically different in this film. Inside is harshly lit with deep shadows on everyone's faces and dark rooms, but the outside is constantly bathed in light. No black and white, just shades of gray. It makes the inside feel stuffy and cramped, in turn making the outside look even better, fresher, and more pastoral. Inside is made by humans, and outside is made by the world, made by God. Everything outside is so wide and tall, expanding towards the heavens, more up than out. It's like they're on the cusp of heaven. The many shots of the sky and clouds allude to the ever-present eternal forces at play, as well as the connection to the natural. At the end of the film, the final shot is a pan up to the clouds. It's as if Francis and his monks have ascended. The vignette with Francis and the leper opens with the landscape dark at night, and Francis crying on the ground, his face buried in the grass. We stay on the unrelenting sound of the clanging and the leper walking towards the forest as Francis follows him for a while. The sky is literally getting farther away each shot, and it takes him minutes to see the leper in the moonlight, where he stands and just walks off. Francis buries his head in his hands when he sees him. This scene uses silence to emphasize human pain, in contrast with that of Pasolini's elevating dramatic silence. The camera moves with Francis as he walks towards the leper and hugs him. The gentle track of the camera insinuates an empathy in the audience. We are literally walking with Francis as he enacts love on this man. When the leper walks off with no response, Francis falls in the grass crying and prays. His face is buried in the earth, the natural, the human, the now, and he's far away from the eternal, the ethereal, the heavenly, as his humility is what keeps him both pious and human. While both directors use Catholicism as the structure they fit over the complex ideas they're discussing, Rossellini is the overtly political one of the two, whereas Pasolini uses Catholicism as a means of understanding himself and his own values on God, religion, capitalism, and class by setting them in the familiar structure of Christ's life. His 1963 short film, La Regard, is a direct attack on the evil cycles of capitalism and consumerism and the smothering greed they cause. Rossellini's past filmography was incredibly political, attacking fascism as the Second World War raged on. Of his religious films, Flowers of St. Francis will diverge to a more political tone from time to time during the vignettes, but nothing is more of a clear criticism of the oppressive politics of modern Italy than Il Messia. The ways these discussions are brought up function in a unique space. The style of the film is set in a framework similar to that of TV movie historical fiction, but it brings up a deeply emotional call against violence and preying on the working class to further fund the rich. The blending of what would seem to be a purely objective form with an aggressive stance against the high class makes for such a layered watch. The atmosphere of Il Messia is constantly juxtaposing between the high and low class. From the beginning narration of the film, we see people triumph in face of leaving an oppressive government that enslaved their lower class population. We see the little boy murdered by a soldier while urinating on the ground, this attack on humanity and innocence, contrasting the medical care of a swooning King Herod with that of all the crying women and children, their corpses in white, pure people with no reason to have been killed. In contemporary times, many people forget how much of a rebel and a protester of his time Jesus was. Rossellini frames him as this revolutionary and shows how he's a radical whom the public won't follow. Jesus is first seen as a supporter of John the Baptist, not the other way around. John remarks on this when he baptizes Jesus. Both Jesus and John the Baptist are incredibly outspoken throughout the film, reminding the audience that the figure who's now at the front and center of organized religion was originally anti-organized religion. When John is imprisoned by King Herod, the king says, "A king has no sins," and John responds, "My king is in the heavens. He's the only king. Thou art a man and a sinner." It takes no courage to speak the truth. During the vignette in Flowers of St. Francis, when Ginepro goes to the village of soldiers, Nicolaio, the supposed amazing leader, is covered head to toe in armor, so much so that he needs multiple people to move him, to take it off, and still he cowers at Ginepro. Rossellini shows the superficiality of the aggressors, and that true resilience will make them cower. That Ginepro, on his own, with his tools to mend his sandals, is more powerful than Nicolaio and his many soldiers who will help him, as he knows the truth and does what is right. One of the major differences between Rossellini and Pasolini is their understanding of suffering and salvation in relation to time. It is the peace and joy you can find in the situations now while you're on Earth. And for Pasolini, it's dealing with everything now so you can have that release in the future, in the afterlife. Both Jesus and St. Francis in Rossellini's films show that you can just let it happen. Do what you have to do. Make the best of things. There's joy everywhere, and you can make it in the worst of situations by getting through things and doing your best for yourself and others. In the name of the Lord, go forth in humility and honesty, praying to God in your hearts, avoiding all vain speech and action. Let each help the other, for he who will not bring peace on earth to his fellow man can hope for little reward from God. And Pasolini sees through this interpretation, as his understanding is less about enjoyment of life now, and instead that the more the one suffers through life, the more they prosper in heaven. Pasolini's Jesus sees regular people as very small and doesn't appreciate fretting over basic concerns before worship to God. This points to an almighty but passive God, one who does not see each individual on Earth as mattering in the grand scheme of things, and thus not important to him. This also relates to Hawks and Sparrows, and Pasolini's envy at the day-to-day mindset of working-class people. He sees them as being concerned only with these types of practical life things, their next meal, if there's a roof over their head, etc. It's fascinating that Pasolini's interpretation of Jesus is that he's not a man of the people, not only because of his sacredness and passion, but because he's an intellectual Christ as well, one that thinks more than he acts, and one who wants the common people around him to stop looking at the small things and focus only on the bigger picture. But for the monks, even wading through giant puddles of water during a rainstorm is full of joy and childlike wonder. They gallop through it. Everything has to be gentle with the monks, whether it be the softer singing of the birds, as asked by Francis, or Bernardo asking to be shaved more gently. These saints are really demanding. Does talking to the birds seem easy to you? Cicillo says in Hawks and Sparrows after having been given the order to teach the birds to speak and pray. Pasolini argues that if one removes the filter of childlike wonder and innocence of those parables, it feels incredibly absurd. Similarly, looking at things that cannot be easily explained by science or logic from a more intellectual perspective will feel absurd too. Nanetto is fed up by the prospects of this task. Pasolini's comment on how not having the baseline understanding of the meaning of an activity like this won't help you get anything out of it. Pasolini is arguing that Rossellini's take isn't enough for him, that Catholicism is inherently violent and dramatic, and to disregard that is to disregard the truth of the violence of the world caused by class despite a shared faith. Cicillo says, "We're not saints, we're human men." The section of Hawks and Sparrows where the raven tells the story of two monks is a direct parody of Flowers of St. Francis. The same birds appear in the same tree, and the group of people throwing around Nanetto is a nod to Ginepro. Even the way that Nanetto and Cicillo walk parodies that of the hopping and skipping of the monks. It's amusing to watch Pasolini try to work in the visual style of Rossellini. He doesn't fully succeed, as his shots expand more outward, while Rossellini's expand upward. He also just has to add more mystical elements into the story, with the talking bird and Cicillo growing into the grass. That also feels like another jab at Rossellini's love for the natural earth in accordance to faith. What's so fascinating about these contrasting filmographies of these two directors is simply how drastic their differences in reinterpretation are. Christ is sanitized and neutralized in the contemporary mainstream to the point that one could project almost any value system onto him. Pasolini's Christ, a mythic being filled with divine fury and rage, one who passionately pushes punishment and condemnation for those who don't give up their lives for worship, is Rossellini's Christ, a simply spoken storyteller and hard worker who preaches the way his mother taught him. As the Church continues to condemn many expansions and rethinkings of their teachings, is anything considered morally Catholic anymore? Especially in a country like Italy, where Catholicism is inherently Italian, and Italy is inherently Catholic. The image of Christ has been oversaturated to the point that he and the religion are almost secularized.
You just a baby, you ride a donkey, I drive Mercedes. Jesus, I'm so much better than you.
Seeping into the culture so much that it's hard to tell what's religious and what isn't, what's moral and what's not. This can also be due to both directors' previous associations, whether in life or with religion, how they were taught, how it was used for them and against them. Pasolini was constantly excommunicated from the Italian mainstream due to his outspokenness, his sexuality, and his film's graphic content. He sees anger in the church because he felt anger from the church. The ever-changing identity and understanding of Christ as an icon or as a human helps us to understand the values of love and acceptance, as well as that of punishment and salvation, of hard work, and above all, being human. Thank you so much for watching. This was adapted from a paper from my Italian cinemas class back in 2020, so it's a little stiffer and different from my style now. But if you like this, please let me know, as I have a ton of film studies papers I'd love to do this with. If you're into what I make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.